I'm going to show you the actual plan I've used to build wealth so I can fully retire at 43 years old, and in a moment I'll tell you how long this whole journey has taken me. And spoiler alert, it has not taken me 30 years, not 20 years, and not even 15 years. It's less than that. And I've done this on low income this whole time and started investing in my late 20s. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you the full map on where I am on this path and how you can do this too. I'm currently about halfway through my wealth building journey. I didn't even think about personal finance at all in my 20s, and I wish I had, honestly. I got burned out with my job at age 29, so I said to myself, I need to make this work so I don't have to be stuck at a job forever. I'm 35 now, and I could do a lean retirement if I wanted to now, but I want to wait about 7 or 8 more years when I believe I can enjoy a full retirement for the rest of my life at age 42 or 43. Welcome to the channel Fascinating, where my goal is to help other people out by giving them tips and ideas for life, finance, and a different perspective. If you like what you hear, please like and subscribe to this channel. So the very first thing is this. The ideas and concepts in this video will work for you, but you have to start with having the right mindset. And this mindset is you gotta go against the grain of society because our culture is always trying to get you to spend money on stuff you don't need. If you can simplify your life as much as possible, and most importantly, be happy with the simple things in life, then this video will work for you. If not, then you're just going to need a lot more money to build wealth, and unless you hit it super hard for a while and create $1 million business, it's just really hard for most people to build wealth this way. I'm not here to show people how to create $1 million business. In fact, it's just the opposite. I'm here to show people how to build wealth the quickest way possible, but not in a get-rich-quick way, but rather in a get-rich-quick kind of slow way, but not too slowly that it takes many decades. My point is, if you sprinkle in ways to build wealth and live your life simply, then you can build wealth much quicker. Because if you're happy with just a few pleasures in life, like a big trip once or twice a year, some fancy dinners just a handful of times a year, fast Wi-Fi, hanging out with friends and family, having free or low-cost experiences like hiking, bicycling, playing sports with friends, and not having too many possessions, especially crazy expensive ones, then you don't even need that much wealth to live off. But if you want a big house, expensive cars, luxury experiences every other week, I'm gonna be honest, my tips aren't for you, and you should just go elsewhere. Sorry to be harsh. My point is, if you're willing to live this way, and this is how I live, then your life will be so much easier and you'll get to your wealth destination so much quicker. Honestly, what more do you need than some simple pleasures here and there? You could spend all day even if you wanted on your phone and still come out ahead, watching videos, playing games, learning something new. Just use your phone more intentionally instead of mindlessly. Anyway, if you can think like this, then the next steps I'm about to show you will create wealth much quicker for you. Once you have the right mindset, you need to create the life that matches your mindset. The correct lifestyle, well, I guess I should say there is no correct lifestyle, but the way that I believe that this wealth journey will work for you is you need to actually reduce your expenses as much as possible and increase your income as much as possible. Then there will be a gap between your income and expenses where the magic's going to happen, which I'll tell you about this magic in a moment. But first, I believe there are two places people are in their lives with this. One, they have the ability to create this wealth because they have not made any life choices that will keep them from building this wealth. Or two, people have already made life choices that will make this super hard to create this lifestyle and build wealth. If you're in the second one, like so many people are, don't give up. I'm just gonna try and help you. But first, let's talk about the first one, which is people who have the ability to create wealth because they haven't made any life choices that will prevent them from building wealth. For example, they haven't racked up tons of credit card debt, or they don't have 6 figures in student loans, or they don't have other expenses that'll take forever to pay off, or they have things that don't drain money out of their bank accounts, such as expensive cars. If you haven't done these things yet, then stop and don't do any of this stuff. And I don't want to blame you or anything for doing these things that you've already done that will make it difficult to get out of financially, because most people didn't realize how hard it was going to be to undo these things. But for reals though, all of that can be whittled down into this concept. With any financial decision I make, is it going to be continuously taking a lot of money out of my pocket for a long time? Yeah, that's oversimplistic, but it's so true. And if it is, then stop. Don't do it. How will you know if it's going to take a lot of money out of your own pocket for a long time? I mean, honestly, if you're unsure, just ask and research it or go on Reddit or ask AI. Take that car example. It starts depreciating the second you drive it off the lot, and then there's gas, maintenance, insurance. It never stops taking money out of your pocket. If you can avoid or mitigate major purchases like these, unless you have a plan to pay them without getting into massive black holes in your wallet, then go for it. But what I'm hoping is you avoid these kinds of purchases in the first place. Again, going back to the mindset, simplify as much as you can. Now, if you're in the second position I mentioned, which is people who have already made life choices that will make this super hard to create wealth and build this lifestyle, then don't give up. Now, it's really hard to give generic wealth advice that'll fit everyone, so I'm going to list as many ways as possible to unbleep your financial life. So here goes. If you're in tons of debt, any debt where you have to pay more than about 5% in interest in a year, then consider that debt an emergency. Stop everything else and focus everything you can towards paying off that debt ASAP. For example, if you have $100,000 in credit card debt and you discover that you have to pay 30% of that in interest each year, which means the interest will be about $30,000, so ouchie wawa, that is an emergency and must be paid off right away before you can start building wealth. By the way, if you have student loans at about 5% interest or less, many people consider that something called working debt because the degree/job you get from it hopefully outweighs the cost of the debt. Then that's not as urgent to be paid off. But still try and whittle down any debts that charge about 5% or less, and try to make payments more than the required payment each month. Basically, start with the things that take the most money out of your pocket each month, and try to reduce that and eventually eliminate it altogether. And let's say you have 3 kids and are drowning in expenses, then what? I wish there was a great single solution to all this, but other than growing your income, if you can't do that, at least right away, you gotta go into extreme non-spending mode. Rice and beans. Figure out what you can cut back on as much as you can. So many people don't even know what they need to cut back on, which brings me to the next step. Once you have the correct lifestyle, you have to start having correct information about your money. This includes tracking everything. Really, a huge secret here is knowing what all your expenses and income are each month. And I say each month because you don't have to obsess about this 24/7. But I would say about once a week when you start out, you want to obsess about all this. And then you can eventually get to about once a month to meticulously track your expenses for the previous month. But what companies and products in our culture wants you to do is spend stuff and not be able to keep track of what you're spending. The more easy it is to buy stuff, like with one-click shopping, the more effort it takes to set up systems to keep in track of. But the good news is you can link all your credit card accounts, investing accounts, bank accounts all in one app, specifically budgeting apps. The ones I like are Copilot and Empower, and Empower is free. Shout out to these budgeting apps. Please sponsor me, hehe. I actually use these 2 and recommend these for my friends. But you really got to know what you're spending, because if you have large or small holes in your spending, it's going to be really hard to build wealth, because your wealth ship is going to have a lot of leaks to plug, for real. After you do this, it's time to know how wealth is most easily built, at least in my opinion. But first, let me give a nice moment to summarize in the video where we are so far. First, have the right mindset. Only have a few simple desires, or 1 or 2 trips a year, or a couple frivolous things once in a while. Try to keep your living expenses low, and this will allow you to build wealth the quickest. Then, if you haven't spent stuff on really bad things that will keep you enslaved financially, understand what they are and avoid them like the plague. If you have already made some decisions that are costly, you can still get out of them, but it will take more research, planning, and heavy lifting to get out of. Now you need to know the correct information about money, track everything. Once that's done, the fun stuff can begin. So here's the fun stuff. You've waited long enough. I'm going to tell you how long it's taken me to get to the point to build wealth where I can retire and not work if I don't want to. How long? It's 14 years. Like I said, I'm about halfway there now, and I could do a lean retirement if I wanted to and live super frugally. But what fun is that? So I'm gonna wait a little bit longer just to live comfortably and modestly. The biggest thing you will constantly need to do is widen the gap between your income and expenses as much as you can. That gap is where the wealth will be generated. To build this gap, the larger you can get your income and the smaller you can get your expenses each month, the more you can build wealth. This concept is just a math equation. If you can go from like $60,000 a year to $70,000 a year in income, and then go from $55,000 a year to $45,000 a year in expenses, then you have just greatly increased that gap that will lead to faster and larger wealth building. The wider you can make this gap, the more you can invest. And real quick side note, before you start investing, save some money for an emergency fund. You see how this kind of is unsexy and plain? But it's honestly exciting because the faster you can grow this gap and invest, then I bet it will feel pretty sexy once you finally build enough in investments to live off and stop working a 9-to-5 job. That's honestly it. Bye. Then what? Oh yeah. Why invest and what to invest in? So why invest? I mean, if you don't want to go the route of starting a business or do real estate or something similar, like what else is there to do? I mean, tell me in the comments if there's a better way. You could inherit money or marry rich or do something shady. Like, you could gamble, which you'd likely lose it all. You could trade options, you could day trade. So basically gamble and lose it all. So yeah. How else other than investing in the market that historically, before inflation, has returned about 10% per year? How else can you build your wealth without doing too much heavy lifting? The American stock market has been the biggest wealth generator of our time, and it's so easy to get into the stock market today, yet people seem to make it so hard. Stop buying individual stocks, stop buying crypto. I think crypto is a scam, I'm just gonna say it. And I'd love to be proven wrong. And okay, if you really want, put like 1 to 2% of your investing into stocks you really like and 1 to 2% into crypto if you have that itch, if you don't want to miss out. And I do have about 1% of my assets in crypto in case I'm wrong. And keep investing consistently and keep it boring. So, boring way number 1 are dividend funds. Okay, before I talk about dividend funds, I gotta show you the more common route really quick, because people are gonna yell at me if I don't talk about index funds and blah, blah, blah. But you know what? That stuff is going to take too long to build wealth in my opinion, and I'll explain the math on that. So boring way number 2 is index funds. Index funds that grow over time that you never sell until you're ready to live off the income. What are index funds? Just a basket of stocks. So with index funds, you are still owning individual stocks, but you're owning hundreds of them. So that way, if one stock fails, you won't blow up your account. And for index funds, just follow the US stock market and then maybe 10% in an international index fund as a hedge. Here are the ones that I actually invest in and like. That's it. So going back to boring way number 1, dividend funds. Dividend funds also usually have baskets of individual stocks or individual entities in them. Look for dividends in the following asset classes: BDCs, covered call, ETFs, REITs, MLPs, CLOs. These are some of my favorites, and diversify between them. Make sure you believe in the companies, understand the dividend funds themselves, like where they're headed, what do they invest in, look at their stock price, look at their charts to make sure the fund has not been on a long-term downtrend, but rather make sure that their stock price is stable over at least 5 years, or even better, is growing. Check out this website called totalrealreturns.com to see what the total returns have been that include all dividend payouts plus the stock price. And aim for dividend funds that have a good stock price history and pay yearly dividends around 10%. Why 10%? Because hopefully you can retire by living off the dividends alone. And if the stock price remains flat or rises, then you'll never run out of money. By the way, watch out for like the yield max dividend funds that return like 100% or 97%. A lot of these funds are just returning your capital over time. If you have many different dividend funds over different asset classes like REITs, BDCs, etc., then you'll likely have a smoother ride in case some of these funds dip. Dividend investing might sound like a lot, but learn more about this, and 2 good books to start getting your feet wet on all this is Stephen Bavaria's book called The Income Factory, as well as another book by another Steve called Retirement Money Secrets by Steve Selengut. I'd actually recommend a mix of dividend funds for income and index funds for growth. As you get closer to retirement, you can lean more into dividend funds. Dividend funds, in my opinion, are the faster way to grow wealth because you can live off a yield of about 10% if you pick the right dividend funds. And if you live off 10%, you need a smaller investment portfolio than if you needed to live off, say, 4%. For example, if you have a $500,000 portfolio giving you about a 10% yield, you can live off $50,000 of that a year. If you have a $500,000 portfolio and you take out 4% a year, that's only $20,000 to live off. Now, remember that gap I was talking about between your income and your expenses? The more of a gap you have between these two things, the more you can put it in index funds and dividend funds. Once you start making the right financial decisions, you gotta be patient. Depending on how much you can invest and how the market does, you really need to give it about 12 to 14 years, and you really need to try to invest as much as you can each month during this time. And you also need to make some projections about how much you need to invest, when to invest it, and what to invest in. So 1, let's figure out how much you need to invest. I did a whole other video on how to figure this out in this video, but basically visualize into the future. When you're going to retire, what are your expenses going to be for a year? This is such an important thing to note because this will determine how big your investment portfolio needs to be and will dictate how much you need to invest each month. Let's say your expenses when you retire will be $60,000. This is everything from housing to healthcare to transportation, everything. Take whatever your specific amount is and multiply it by 10. In this example, 60,000 times 10 comes out to 600,000. Therefore, once you get to 600,000 in dividend funds that are good dividend funds and the stock price isn't falling, but rather staying flat or even rising, you can live off this forever. A lot of people at this point are going to be scratching their heads, especially those who have heard of the 4% rule. Well, remember, this is a video on how to retire and not wait decades. I don't think this concept is talked about enough compared to the 4% rule. So now, when do you invest? I would just do every week and probably every month. And how much you need to save to invest and what your expenses are going to be when you retire, well, it's all math, as you can tell. Going back to that example, if you need $60,000 to live off each year when you retire, remember, multiply that by 10, which is $600,000 you'll need to get to in investments. Let's say you have zero invested right now. Let's say you have $1,000 each month that you can invest in. Divide 600,000 by 1,000, and this will equal 600,000, meaning it will take you 600 months or 50 years to get to 600,000 in investments, which, yeah, is a lot, but hold on. It's actually less because your investments will compound over time. Compounding is huge. And so obviously 50 years is way too long, and some of you might not even be alive 50 years from now. And we need to understand compounding. So here's where we want to do some trial and error and just use a compound interest calculator. Check out these two and play with the numbers to see how much you need to invest each month. Before we continue, some of this might be a lot to take in, so honestly, take your time with understanding this. And if you don't understand something, research it or even ask in the comments. So, we need to tweak several variables in this compound interest calculator. This method just works for me because I'm not a mathematician by any means, so trial and error works for developing my game plan. For me, I ask myself, how soon do I realistically want to retire? And the word realistic here is most important, because of course I would retire today if I could. But let's continue with this example. Realistically, let's say you believe you can give yourself 15 years to go from 0 to 600,000 and not break your back along the way, and live and enjoy your life along the way. Again, this is just an example, so your specific numbers will be different. But my point is to, you got to really think hard about this. Okay, so let's say 15 years from now you want to retire. Plug this into the compound interest calculator. How much can you put away each month? The more you can put away, the faster you can retire. Let's say you can put away $2,000 a month to invest in. Plug that into the calculator. I really recommend taking into account inflation when you calculate this, because inflation will eat into your returns. Inflation usually runs around 2 to 3% a year, even though it's been running hotter the past few years, but in the 2010s it was lower. So for simplicity, you can just plug in, let's say 2.5% a year, and then hit calculate and boom. At this rate, in 15 years, if you get about a 10% return each year, you could have over 800,000 in this example, and you can live off 10% of that, which is about 80,000, which would be incredible. However, before you get really excited, if inflation holds true, then that 80,000 in 50 years will feel more like 55,000. Because of inflation, your 800,000 portfolio will feel maybe like 550,000 in today's money, this figure on the right. So if your target is 60,000, then you're basically there in about 15 years. A whole lot can happen in 15 years, and all these projections are rough estimates, and you will be adjusting and learning as these 15 years go on. I use these compound interest calculators a lot to help give me a general guide on the path I'm trying to go down. So how often do you invest? Keep it simple. Every paycheck, or if you're a freelancer, just do it once a month, 12 times a year. This works great because you aren't trying to time the market, and you'll invest during dips, flat periods, and rallies in the market. To summarize, have the right mindset where you don't need to spend a lot in life, and you can just find joy in the simple things. Once you have this mindset, track your expenses. Then widen the gap between your income and expenses by increasing your income or reducing your expenses, and ideally both. Use that gap to invest in a mix of dividend funds for income and index funds for growth. Calculate how much you need to invest in each month to get to a target date that you choose you want to retire, and use a compound interest growth calculator to determine this. Ideally, you should lean more heavily toward dividend funds that yield about 10%. Because if, for example, your yearly expenses are $50,000 and you have a dividend portfolio that pays about 10% a year, or $50,000 in dividends, and all the funds in your dividend portfolio are not falling in stock price, but ideally staying flat or even rising, then that dividend portfolio should theoretically pay you $50,000 a year forever, and boom, you can live off that forever and not have to work. If you're about a decade or more from your retirement, I'd also recommend doing a mix of index funds as well, because growth funds, aka index funds, historically have higher returns than dividend funds, and you can use that higher value when you're closer to retirement to convert it into dividend funds. But watch out for taxes if you do this, and consult with a financial planner on this. With all this, let me know how it goes and what you think.